I am Reverend Dr. Henry Lee Bates, coming to you live from Palm Springs, California. I am teaching from the wisdom of the ancients, the truth given to us by the Mastermind Jesus, and the practical mysticism that will surely set us free. You can find out more about this ministry by going to www.rev-bates.com or by visiting the Way to a Wonderful Life channel on youtube.com. Just type in the YouTube search box, Rev-Bates, the Way to a Wonderful Life channel, and you will find over 500 of my radio messages with additional recordings in both English and Spanish that you can listen to 24/7. Now, last week we went over some material from a radio program by the great Neville Goddard from 1951 or 1952. And tonight I have some more words from him that's going to help us navigate through some things, but this jumps us all the way up to 1968. So we're going to go from 1951 to 1968. And the same great teacher of spiritual mysticism was Neville Goddard. Most people know him by Neville. If you want, you can Google him on the internet and you'll find all kinds of things about him, and you'll see several books that were written by him or books that were written using transcripts from his radio programs and from his lectures and Sunday sermons. He worked throughout East Coast and the West Coast both, speaking at churches and spiritual centers as a guest speaker, and was very, very popular. And his work still has a great number of followers, even to this day. So we know that once we find something that's true and we focus on it, we can use that thing as a spiritual principle, as a spiritual, practical thing that we can use to bring greater happiness and greater harmony and greater prosperity and greater joy into our lives, and more importantly, a greater love for life. You know, we're to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind. The Mastermind Jesus tells us, and God is life. So we're to love life. We're not just to exist or to just see this life as something we need to get through so that we can go to heaven or go to, I don't think too many people plan on going to hell. But we're to live this life. We're to love it. If we're not loving this life, then we're not loving God, because God is life. God is the essence of the life within each and every one of us. God is the power, the intelligence, the spirit of us. We're created in God's own image and likeness, so we know that image and likeness is spirit, because Jesus said, and he's telling us the truth, the Father is spirit, he said. Spirit. Spirit is like mind. The Father is spirit, and we're to worship him in spirit and in truth. In other words, worship means to follow, to obey, to receive instruction from that higher power that we call God. So as we go into meditation or we go into the silence, and we open our mind to receive that inspiration, that guidance from on high, then we shall find it. Shall find ourselves, being guided, being directed, being given solutions for things that we consider in our humanness we consider to be problems. So we know that this is what we want to do. Now, a lot of people contact me and say, well, what is it that you teach? What is it that's going on with your ministry? What are your principles that you subscribe to? And so I tell them, these are very simple. The intelligence, the power, and the spirit that we call God, for lack of a better word, is absolute good everywhere present. Every human being is an expression of this divine spirit, by whatever name we want to call it. It indwells all people. Our very essence is of it, and therefore we are also inherently good. inherently good, meaning that there's even the most evil, awful person has been loved by someone, because that someone found something good in them to love. So there's an inherent goodness about it. We create our experience by the activity of our thinking and the things that we believe and accept to be true. Everything in the manifest realm has its beginning in the unseen. That's why the Apostle tells us that faith is the evidence of things unseen, because it's evidence of things that haven't been realized or manifested in the physical yet. So prayer is creative thinking that heightens a connection with this spirit, and therefore brings forth wisdom and healing, prosperity, and everything good. And knowing and understanding the laws of life, also called truth, are not enough. A person must also live the truth that he or she knows. And what that means to live the truth is to practice these principles. To take the time for silent meditation every day, take the time to think about what it is that we want to create something in our imagination that will make us feel good about life, to love life in a greater way, to see ourselves moving through whatever it is that we must mind first, and then all the things that we're to act upon, all the things that we're to do in the physical. So once again, I am Reverend Dr. Henry Rev-Bates, coming to you live from Palm Springs, California. This is the Way to a Wonderful Life. And our Way to a Wonderful Life message for today is titled, No One is Without Sin. No one is without sin. But first we need to understand what sin is. Sin is just self-inflicted nonsense. Self-inflicted nonsense. One of the worst things that we can do to ourselves, the worst thing we can do to those that love us, the worst thing we can do to that affects the world around us, is not to love ourselves. Because if we don't love ourselves, we're not going to love life. And if we're not loving life, we're not loving God, which is life. And therefore, all manner of unnecessary negative things happen. When we love ourselves, we choose more wisely, and we all have inherent choice. Sometimes people will talk about God's will. Well, if God has a will, the only will that would be that we choose, so that we choose wisely, and we always choose for the good. We always choose for the good. And so what do you think I meant when I said our title is No One is Without Sin? You know, at some point, everyone has mentally coveted or stolen. This is from Neville. Describe a person in unflattering terms, and you have stolen their good name. Everyone is guilty. Therefore, do not analyze yourself, for if you do, you will miss your mark. To worry about what you may have done is to waste your creative power. You will reap what you sow, as every imaginable act fulfills itself. But start now to plant something lovely, not only for yourself, but for your neighbor, your friends, and for your children. Fall in love with the idea that they are all happy and secure. Feel the satisfaction that comes when we recognize that this good is happening for them. This good is happening. We want it to be in our mind that all the people that we care about are feeling good about life, are healthy and happy. So when we do something consciously and see what happens, then we'll receive enormous satisfaction. It'll give us great satisfaction to see our prayers realized, our prayers answered. And we can do it, to see the things that we imagine with our own gifted imagination become realized and manifested in the physical. There is nothing more satisfying than that, because then we know that we're in attunement with the infinite, So Neville tells us to prove your thoughts have creative power by consciously imaging constantly and walk on the water. Walk on the water. Pretend you're walking on the water. Imagine you can walk on water. No matter what happens in the course of the day, revise it. Make the day conform to what you want it to be, and you are walking on water. In other words, you're doing something that nobody else can do for you but you. Genesis tells us in the book of Genesis, it tells the story of Jacob, who saw a well covered with a stone. Removing the stone, he drew water for his flock. And when he put the stone back, everything appeared to remain the same as before. So no one knew who had rolled away the stone and removed the water. In the New Testament, Jesus performed his first miracle by filling the stone jars with water and drawing out wine. Turned water into wine. So facts blind the eye of imagination. Remember, the first letter of the word imagination is I. It comes back to I. Remember, nobody can say I for you. No one. Only you can say I am. Only you can say I can. Only you can say I can't. Only you can say I struggle. Only you can say I succeed in success and prosperity in all that I do. That I is God's power within you, gifted to you, inherent with you, just like the inherent good within all of us. That I is our power. God has given us that I so we can choose. So we can choose how we talk about ourselves, how we think about ourselves, how we think about the world in which we live, and that I carries with it a great deal of imagination. So the I of imagination powerful. The devil says, I have come to cure this blindness to show you how to remove the acts of nature. The woman in the office shared her facts, as well as the man who had been bawled out. Discovering imagination to be his well, my friend removed those stone facts from his mind and drew the truth he desired to hear out of his imagination and placed it in another vessel, another fact. In other words, all the commotion that happened in the office between these people, he revised it in his mind, revised it. Pour water into any container and it will not care what shape or size the vessel may be. Freeze the container and the water will have taken on its shape. So if you remove the stone and draw out the water, you can place it into any shape you desire, and it will externalize itself. The same happens with thought and mind and imagination. We must let that become true within our mind. So let's go back to Neville. He says, do not let a day pass without practicing the art of walking on water. In other words, using your imagination to go beyond the physical. Every time you use your imagination lovingly, on behalf of another, you are mediating God to the seeming other. So many people use their imagination unlovingly, yet they are still mediating God to that other person. Millions of people believe that someone has placed a curse on someone. People believe these things. Do you know that such powers do exist? Because imagining, creates reality. William Butler Yeats, the great philosopher, once said, I will never be certain it was not some woman treading in the winepress who started the subtle change in men's minds, or that the pressing out of that of which so many countries were given to the sword did not begin in the mind of some shepherd boy, lighting up his eyes for a moment before it ran upon his way. Who knows who, this night, feeling hurt and betrayed by a friend, will set their thoughts of anger and revenge into motion with no thought of regret. No thought of regret. And why is there no thought of regret? I don't know what power they have. Perhaps he does not know the art of forgiveness or have the desire to forgive, thereby allowing his thoughts to move and build until they come to their inevitable end, by outpicturing themselves in his life. But as George Bernard Shaw said, some men see things as they are and say, why? I see things that never were and say, why not? I tell you the incredible story of Jesus, the pattern which mankind must follow in order to escape eternal death, and say, why not? Why not? How can we who were physically born by the grace of God, yet cannot make one hair on our head or fingernail grow, dare to put a limit on God's power? If the grace of God gave us physical birth, cannot that same power give us spiritual birth into a higher world? The promise is, you shall be born from above. If God makes such a promise, he has the power to keep it, and he does, through his gift of vision. Through his gift of vision. Let's continue on with some more of Neville. He writes, born of flesh, by a power beyond ourselves, we are destined to be born into a spiritual world by a power beyond ourselves, because God's seed descended and united with us. It was planted by a creative act, and when that seed is fertilized, it erupts. The pattern awakens, and we move into an entirely different age. God's pattern has erupted in you and me. I am telling you my story in the hope that you hear it and will believe and prove its truth for yourself. I have told you of the world's law, taught you how to walk on the water and use this psychological law to change your world, not only for yourselves but for others. No one needs to remain behind the proverbial 8-ball if we know this truth. There is no need to beg or ask anyone for anything, for everything lives in the human imagination, ready to appropriate and be made visible. Be made visible. And those are powerful words by Neville. But he's challenging us to do exactly what Jesus did. Think about Jesus. Think about what he did. That for most people that don't have any faith, or most people that are like, have watered down faith, or they call themselves casual Christians, is that what it is, or Christian light. I think that was the term that was used, 10 or 15 years ago. They called themselves Christian light, which means they didn't believe in the miracles in the Bible. They didn't believe in the miracles that Jesus had performed. And the reason they didn't is because they didn't understand that a miracle is really just something that we don't understand. If we understood it, it wouldn't be a miracle anymore. It's just we don't have the intelligence, that higher level of intelligence to understand it, so we call it a miracle. But in truth, there's a verifiable way to realize what caused it, and to know that cause created an effect. So through his imagination, the mastermind Jesus saw multiple loaves and fish rather than one loaf of bread and 1 or 2 fish. I can't remember. When he was feeding the multitudes for the little boy, I think it was a little boy, said he had 1 fish and 2 loaves of bread, or he had 2 fish and 1 loaf of bread. I can't remember. I have to look it up. There's so many things that we have to remember, of so many things that we're called on to remember in a week's time and a day's time, that we don't always get them straight. But I assure you that Jesus did multiply the loaves and fishes using his divine imagination, something that he tells us that we all have, because he said, very straightforward, very direct, don't ye know that ye are gods? And, he said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. And then he further stated, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. At hand. It's not the next world. It's not the life after this one. We can have our heaven right here on earth. It's up to us, or we can have a hell right here on earth. Just like the title of this message, no one is without sin. Well, no one is without sin. We've all had our negative thoughts about something or somebody. We've all heard the negative stuff in the politics and say, well, I wouldn't say that, but I do agree with what they're saying. I agree with, their line of thought of what they're saying. So that's the same thing. It's like when you say something negative or believe something negative about someone, you're stealing their integrity and you're stealing their character, because we don't know always what people's intentions are. But we do know that we're all living the life of God, that we're all inherently good, and that's the absolute truth for all of us. We are that image likeness. So let's go back to Neville. He tells us, everyone will be born from above, for everyone is part of God, and there is nothing but God. No one can fail. But God's story must be heard and believed. So God sends himself as the messenger by choosing an individual and impregnating him. The person may or may not know what is happening, but in the perfect interval of time, birth will take place. Everyone here is called for a purpose. If you have not been united with this seed, wait, for it is sure and will not be late. There are those who have been conscious when they received the seed, others have not. But when the child is born, does it matter whether the moment of conception is remembered or not? It's all the fulfillment of a perfect plan within God's eternal body, each filling their specific order. There are those who will be the apostle, others the prophet, still others the teacher, the helper, and the healer. There are different levels in the body of God, but it doesn't matter, because in that body, we are all one. We are all one. Now that's a hard one for most people to believe, because they've accepted how the world has put people in different classes, based on race, based on nationality, based on how much money they have, based on their sexual orientation even, based on whether they're married or not, and living with a woman if it's a man, or a man and a woman who live together without a piece of paper that shows that they're legally married, as if God is always looking for that piece of paper, right? But let's get ourselves in tune with the infinite, in tune with the reality of the life that we're living. I know that there's only one God, there's only one life, there's only one spirit. That spirit moves through its creation. And each and every one of us are individualized, unique creations of the one. That's why, and I said this before, I may even have said it as early before as last week's message, we all have a unique set of fingerprints. We all do. Because it's to show us our uniqueness, to give us evidence of our uniqueness, to give us evidence that we're all infinitely individualizations of the one, infinite individualizations of the one life, the one intelligence, the one power, the one spirit that we call God. So let's go back to Neville. He says, take me seriously. When you know what you want in life, construct a scene which would imply your desire is fulfilled. In other words, construct this scene using your divine imagination. See it as clearly as possible. Feel its naturalness for you. Experiment until you know the scene and all it implies is real. Now, to the degree that you believe in its reality, your experiment will become your experience. Do not stop there. Keep on imagining and share your results with others. Tell them how to free themselves from this bondage to the world. But don't tell them until you see the result. don't tell them till you see the results. Otherwise, they'll plant that seed of doubt, that seed of ridicule, that seed of unbelieving into your story if you're not careful. We don't want that to happen. That's from me. That's not from Neville. I will go back to Neville right now. When you know who you really are, you will not envy anyone. How could you? When you know you are part of God and they are only yourself pushed out. If tomorrow something comes into your life that is not to your liking, do not accept it. For this fact blinds the eye of imagination. Remember that eye, how powerful that is. We must understand I am. It's a power, inherent power of choice that God has given us to choose the life that we want to live, to choose the life that we want to experience. We have to use it. Remove the blindness by asking yourself, what would you like in place of what seems to be? Enter into that thought. Revel in it as though it were not a fact. Persuade yourself that it is. Believe in its reality and it will become your experience. Believe in your reality and let it come to your experience. We have to know these things. We have to understand there's something going on with us that's far more powerful than what we see when we look in the mirror. There's something going on with us far more powerful. Than any of that. George Bernard Shaw said, some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream of things that never were and say, why not? When you think of your birth into this world as an act of God, can anything be impossible to God? Not knowing how or why you are here, you sin against the very spirit of who you are and what gave you life. Sin is self-inflicted nonsense. Let's believe in ourselves. The great philosopher William Blake said the eternal body of mankind is the imagination, the eternal body of mankind. The imagination is the spirit of us, the soul of us, the unseen of us. We must find within our lives, within our very own lives, the truth of us. We must learn to believe in ourselves. It doesn't do any good to believe in God if you don't believe in yourself. How can you believe in the life that's greater, the life that's infinite, if you can't believe in the life that's beneath, the life that you see in the mirror every day? You know, we need to plant that seed within us. That seed of desiring to know that we are connecting ourselves with the power, the spirit, and the intelligence with God, with the infinite. That we are indeed the image likeness of that power that's greater than we are. That God's will for us is to use the power of that eye, that infinite eye that's been individualized in each and every one of us, to choose, and to choose wisely, to choose health, to choose happiness, to choose loving companionship, to choose joy and wealth, all the things that make life wonderful. We are to love life with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, and as we do, we are loving the good God Almighty that created us and breathe life into us. And so it is. Once again, I want to thank you for being with me today. It's been my great pleasure to have you. This is Reverend Dr. Henry Lee Bates from Palm Springs, California, coming to you live with The Way to a Wonderful Life. Visit me on www.revbates.com and on YouTube at Rev-Bates, The Way to a Wonderful Life channel. God bless.